helicopters. They're massively inefficient and unbelievably complicated. Up to 2.5 million parts flying in close formation. But they can do something that nothing else can. They can hover.
So just how have we harnessed this unique hovering ability to create delivery machines that can pick up and drop off anywhere?
This is the world's biggest helicopter, and I'm inside it.
Helicopters don't have wings, yet they're able to fly amazingly well and do something that normal aircraft can't do, and that is hover.
This is because they fly in a completely different way to aeroplanes. Their wings are fixed firmly to the fuselage, and as the whole aircraft moves forwards, air passes over the wings, producing lift, carrying the aircraft into the air.
But helicopters are a tad more complicated. The rotor blades rotate, causing air to pass over themselves as they do, creating lift, just like this. Yes! Well done, Chopper. You're a boy.
This so-called rotary flight is inefficient because the rotors have to spin all the time to keep the machine in the air.
But because of rotary flight, helicopters can fly without actually moving forward. They can hover.
Designs for helicopters have been around for over 500 years. Leonardo da Vinci had plans for one, but it would never have worked.
That's because Leonardo didn't address the main problem with helicopters.
Namely, as the rotor spins, the fuselage will spin madly too, unless something is done to stop it. So, Leonardo's pilot would have been one dizzy dude.
At the beginning of the 20th century, helicopters finally took to the skies, cancelling out the spinning problem with crazy multi-rotor designs. They could hover, but were incredibly complicated and almost uncontrollable.
For helicopters to become practical, a radical approach was needed. And in 1939, a Russian emigre by the name of Igor Sikorsky finally cracked it. The system used on most helicopters to this very day.
Igor Sikorsky always had a fascination with rotary flight. In America in 1939, his first helicopter took to the air, the VS-300. Sikorsky himself was at the controls, wearing his favorite hat, of course. So how did it work?
Sikorsky went for a single large main rotor, just like Da Vinci, and then he added a smaller tail rotor. It works like this. As the main rotor spins round, the fuselage tries to spin in the opposite direction. But in this case, it's stopped by the tail propeller, or tail rotor as it's known, which pushes the fuselage back in the opposite direction.
Thanks to Sikorsky and his tail rotor, the helicopter's ability to hover could be harnessed. It takes massive coordination, though. You've got to operate a cyclic stick to control direction, a collective lever that controls up and down movement, and rudder pedals that keep you pointing the right way, all at the same time.
I'm now in control of the cyclic stick, and I'm trying to keep the hover. This is where it gets a little bit tricky.
That's excellent.
Very small movements, subtle, incredibly subtle movements on the cyclic stick. Whoa, hello, hello, hello. Ah!
And back a bit now.
Right. Okay.
And left a tiny bit. That's good. Oh, here she goes. That's it. Sort it out. Left pedal. Half second. There we go.
You just suddenly go away with you without knowing, can't it?
Yeah.
I lost control of the aircraft because I'm concentrating on what I'm saying as opposed to actually the cyclic stick. Wow. I'm trying to crack this properly here. This is the best I've ever done.
Wow.
This is the best I've ever done. I've got to keep it nice and subtle. This is the best I've ever done. And it is incredibly subtle movements. So I am doing this, folks. I'm really proud of myself. Hey.
Only when you can hover can you really use a helicopter.
So why do we actually rotate sort of that way slowly all the time? Is that
It's just me not very good with the pedals.
Sikorsky was quick to harness the hovering capability of his first production helicopter, the R4, for search and rescue work.
60 years have passed since Sikorsky's R4 helicopter first flew, but the Sikorsky company is still building rescue helicopters today. Big rescue helicopters. I'm waiting for the Coast Guard Sikorsky 61N to come and rescue me. It's a heavy-duty workhorse of the sea with a range of over 300 miles. And here it comes, all 10 tons of it.
Yeah, on the main, push main. Forward 5 and left, forward and left, forward only 3 now. Going in the doorway and ready for one wet. Full correction, forward 3 and right.
Sikorsky's first rescue helicopter could only pick up one person, whereas this phenomenally powerful modern monster has got room up there for 32.
One and back, come back, steady. Steady. Forward and right for 1. John's happy and steady. Punching in. And clear the water. And you clear forward and left slowly and down to avoid the guy in the water. Okay, coming down. Roger. Over the doorway.
Sikorsky's company built the first S-61 in 1962, and they've been adopted as search and rescue helicopters all around the world ever since. This British Coast Guard S-61 alone flies over 200 rescue missions every year.
This helicopter is kept in the air by 2 General Electric jet engines, each knocking out 1,500 horsepower. Enough to keep this helicopter in the air during a storm force 10 gale.
It's huge, over 70 feet long, and it needs to be able to pick up an entire ship's crew 150 miles offshore and carry the 10 tons of fuel necessary to get there and back.
And it can search in the dark thanks to an infrared camera in the nose. Here's the monitor. And pinpoint exactly where a person bobbing up and down in the ocean may be. If you actually zoom in and you'd found me, you'd actually be able to zoom right in and see the fear on my face. You can easily fit a couple of minis in here, or as they did back in 1993, 32 people. But as well as being huge, this Sikorsky helicopter, thanks to its tail rotor layout, is incredibly maneuverable.
To demonstrate just how maneuverable the S-61 is, we're going to try and hold station over a moving speedboat and lower somebody down into it. Wonder who'll be getting that job then.
Here's our board, and watching it.
The Sikorsky is a massive workhorse of the sea, specifically harnessed to lift people to and from the waves.
Over the doorway. And bringing it in.
But incredible as it may seem, there's a helicopter out there that's capable of picking up the Sikorsky. It's bigger than an airliner, it's 50% bigger than any other helicopter, and can lift a load of over 20 tons.
That's the equivalent of 2 double-decker buses.
It's a Russian Mil-26, the biggest production helicopter of all time.
Well, I am truly honoured to be in the presence of such a huge, rugged, hovering truck. Absolutely fantastic. Look at it in all its riveted vastness. Magnificent. Take a look at the space in here. Woo! This load space is the equivalent volume capacity of a Lockheed Hercules, which is pretty vast.
So why would anyone build a helicopter this big? Well, in the 1970s, the Soviet government wanted to get massive mining equipment into northern Siberia, an inaccessible region with no roads, no airports, no nothing.
Now, of course, working in the tundra, Siberia being Siberia, this helicopter had to work in terrible weather conditions with minimal maintenance.
So the Russians designed the giant helicopter
With a simple, low-maintenance single rotor layout, just like Sikorsky had used.
Great, but this created a massive engineering challenge. With the Sikorsky layout, you've only got one main rotor, so to get the required lifting power for the biggest helicopter in the world, that single rotor has to be absolutely enormous.
And crucially needs a helicopter engine more powerful than anything ever built to spin it. And that's what's in here. Absolutely fantastic.
It's a Lotarev D-136 jet engine. It develops 12,000 horsepower. That's twice as much as a heavy goods train. And the mill's got two of them, burning 2.5 tons of fuel each per hour.
But, as no other machine can lift 2 double-decker buses vertically, virtually anywhere, then it's an inefficiency we're pretty happy to put up with. With a normal helicopter, you duck down low when you approach it, just in case the blades take your head off. But with a mill, there's no danger of that because the rotor blades are 26 feet off the ground. It is truly and utterly and gloriously gargantuan. The gearbox alone of this machine weighs 3.5 tons and takes a staggering 180 litres of oil to lubricate it. I do feel as if I could actually walk along one of the rotor blades, but I'm not going to do that. Everything is just delightfully Russian. Wonderful.
Now you want to see some real flying. Watch this. Impressed, huh?
So what's the giant helicopter used for now the Cold War's over? Well, it's rented out all over the world. And if you've got a few million quid to spare, it's yours to carry massive machinery to places that have no access whatsoever. But huge and brilliant as the MiL-26 is, it has one drawback common to all single-rotor helicopters. They can only lift a load from one point directly beneath their center of gravity, or they'll tip up, which makes carrying several loads underneath all at once difficult. If you want to lift a multiple load, you need a completely different rotor layout. Only this can do this. Whilst Igor Sikorsky was perfecting his simple tail-rotored helicopters in the 1940s, another inventor was going down a very different route. He was only in his early 20s, and his name was Frank Piasecki.
Piasecki didn't like Sikorsky's tail rotor, arguing that it wasted some of the engine's power that could otherwise be used for lift. Plus, a circular saw at head-chopping level wasn't the safest of layouts.
He was determined to perfect the two-rotor system as used in the crazy, uncontrollable machines of the earliest helicopter pioneers.
Great! But could Piasecki build one that worked?
The early two-rotor helicopters had always been difficult to control, as the downwash from their front rotors completely destabilized the back rotor.
Piasecki found that if he positioned the rear rotor slightly higher than the front rotor, the problem will be completely solved.
His prototype, the PV-3, first flew on March the 7th, 1945. Nicknamed the Flying Banana, it was by far the world's biggest helicopter at the time.
In the West, Piaseki's helicopters have dominated the heavy lift market ever since, their current incarnation being these, the CH-47 Chinooks, the world's most employed heavy lift helicopters.
The Chinook is over 100 feet long from tip to tip. Each of its two rotors has a diameter of 60 feet, and
inside there's room for 2 Land Rovers or 54 fully equipped troops. It can carry a staggering 12.5 tons, which is the equivalent of a double-decker bus, and fly at 180 miles an hour whilst carrying it. And just as Piasecki had worked out, the rear rotor is higher than the front rotor.
Chinooks first entered service in the 1960s in Vietnam. Over 2,000 are still flying. They're the heavy lift workhorses of Western military forces, carrying huge cargoes of men and equipment to places no other machine can reach. And crucially, they can carry several cargoes at once. Today, we're transporting the Land Rover, a pack of supplies, and a field gun.
Right, so here's the team for today. These guys are known as the hookers. Matty, you're in charge here today, Kelly, and Jason. Excellent. You're on the comms to the aircrew, yeah? Brilliant. So what's the form then?
Right, literally, obviously we've got these 3 loads today. We're going to lift them up. Basically, the netting load is going to be direct to the aircraft, which is that there. We're going to have the Land Rover on the back on a 3-metre strop, and the 105 gun will be in the middle on an 8-metre strop.
So we've got a total load today of 6.8 tons, yeah? 3, 2, and 1.8, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Because the helicopter has rotors at either end, there are 3 points underneath that we can use to lift the load without interrupting the centre of gravity. This makes it easier to pick up multiple loads like the gun, the Land Rover, and the 2-ton cargo pack. Bit of a downwash though. You need a good footing if you're going to not be blown over. Of all the loads we're lifting today, the gun, the Land Rover and the cargo pack, the gun is easily the most dangerous. If that swings around, it could take your head off. Now you can actually see the rotors overlapping. Now to keep these in sync, to stop them colliding, there are 7 interconnecting drive shafts. Vital to the operation of a Chinook. I'm a hooker. It's hooking time.
Fix the fence up and then run back in, and then we'll hook up, we'll run back out. Same thing on the Land Rover, and then he'll take it away.
underneath the helicopter, at least you're sheltered from the downwash.
Height is good, steady. Hooker's working with a load.
But you've really got to trust the pilots and the engines.
Close on. Hook gently. Height is good, right one. 15 and back. Let's move right as well. Yeah, okay, right. When you're happy on heading, just shout. Yeah, that's heading now.
And once everything's attached, we're up and away.
Load's clear of the ground. That's a good load. 25 good. 45 speed and 65 knots safe.
Even with all this hanging beneath it, this incredible machine can still maneuver. But because it's got no tail rotor, the Chinook's controlled in a completely different way from a normal helicopter. Everything is based on which way the different main rotors are pointing. To bank left, they both simply point left. And to bank right, they point right.
If the front rotor now angles left and the back one stays flat, we'll pivot around the tail.
And that's how the Chinook gets into position to deliver its loads. Thanks to the Chinook's double rotors, we can drop the loads off one after the other,
Gently for this, because we're going to have to get the gun down on the centre and then straight away.
without upsetting the helicopter's centre of gravity and the whole thing tipping up. Perfect for the Chinook's battlefield role, where a single helicopter often needs to deliver separate loads to different units in one trip.
The Chinook is designed with just one thing in mind: heavy lift. Having two main rotors gives it enormous lifting power and great load flexibility. But this layout does have its drawbacks.
It's spectacularly complicated. A Chinook is effectively made up of 2.5 million parts, which means an enormous amount of maintenance. But
None of that matters when they can offer a service no other machine can provide. They can deliver anywhere.
And finally, helicopters are all well and good, and of course able to deliver anywhere, but what happens when you're 1,000 feet up and the engine stops? You go into what's known as auto-rotate, quite freaky. My stomach went for it there. Basically, the engine is disengaged, and now we're gliding on the rotating rotors. There's a bit of a ground rush coming up. We're getting close to those jumbos rather quickly, but I'm not panicking. I'm in good hands here. Basically, the rotors are still turning and we're kind of gliding on them. And a massive ground rush now as we come down, and oh yes, oh. And there it is. Yeah, we're on the skids and we're at a standstill. That was quite freaky. That really was quite freaky.